On behalf of the Kabangan family and the ALC Media Group, we give thanks to the Lord for allowing us to continue the story started 30 years ago by my father, the late Ambassador and Chairman Emeritus of the ALC Group of Companies, Antonio L. Cabangon Chua. It is the story of how a small magazine got built on the strength of an incomparable friendship between a man of business and a man of words. This is the story of how they both cherished literature and vowed to nurture excellent literary works in the pages of the magazine. Through the best of times and the worst of times, we continue this story. This is the story of the Philippines graphic.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to Business Mirror's first coffee club discussion. I am your host, Anne Ruth de la Cruz, Business Mirror's Special Projects Editor. To celebrate the 95th birth anniversary of Blas F. Ople, the Blas Ople Policy Center and Training Institute and Business Mirror came together to organize this Blas F. Ople Forum on Philippine overseas employment, past, present, and future. To start the ball rolling, here is Mr. T. Anthony C. Cabangon, the publisher of Business Mirror, with his welcome remarks.
Good morning and welcome to Business Mirror's first coffee club session for 2022. We come together today to honor the legacy of a man who has contributed so much to protect Filipino workers both locally and abroad. He is no other than Blas F. Ople. Ka Blas would have been 95 years old today. Prior to pursuing a career in public service, Ka Blas was a former deckhand at the Manila North Harbor and a journalist where he wrote for Daily Mirror and the Philippines Graphic, among others. So it only seemed appropriate that Philippines Graphic sister publication would host this forum. Ka Blas also became the first college dropout to serve longest as labor minister and secretary, framer of the 1987 Constitution, senator, Senate President, and Foreign Affairs Secretary. However, Ka Blas will always be known as the father of Philippine Labor Code and the architect of the country's formal labor migration policy program. Hence, the Philippine Overseas Employment bears his name. I would like to thank Ms. Susan B. Ople and the Blas F. Ople Policy Center and Training Institute for inviting Business Mirror to be part of this very timely coffee club discussion on the creation of the Department of Migrant Workers and how this will affect overseas employment. We have invited a very distinguished panel of speakers to talk about Ka Blas and about the creation of the new department. We hope that this morning's coffee club will enlighten us all on the issue at hand. Again, thank you and good morning to you all.
Okay, thank you, Boss Anton, for your welcome remarks. Ka Blas held many government positions during his illustrious career. He was the labor minister and later the labor secretary, and he served as the secretary of foreign affairs as well as Senate president. But before all that happened, Ka Blas was once a journalist who wrote for Horizons, Manila Bulletin, Windows, Panorama Magazine, Daily Mirror, and Philippines Graphic. The organizers were able to request for inspirational messages from Foreign Affairs Secretary Chadoro Locsin Jr., Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello III, and D. Edgar C. Cabangon, chairman of the ALC Media Group, on the occasion of Ka Blas's 95th birthday. Let's start with that of Secretary Locsin, to be followed by the messages of Secretary Bello and Sir Edgar.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we celebrate today the 95th birth anniversary of a man whose life's work revolved around the protection and upliftment of the Filipino migrant worker. Senator, former member of the Constitutional Commission, Cory Aquino's only personal and insistent choice, the first Filipino president of the General Assembly of the International Labor Organization, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary of Labor, a famous heavy smoker to the detriment of his health and to our nation's great loss, and a steadfast advocate for the working class, Blas Ople. Throughout his remarkable career in government, Blas employed his considerable talents as writer, thinker, and the one high public official with a completely untarnished record of personal honesty and intellectual integrity to improve the welfare of Filipino workers and their standing in society. He introduced and elevated labor standards and created public institutions dedicated to the protection of workers' rights. But he is perhaps best known for initiating the Philippines Overseas Employment Program that transformed millions of Filipino lives and made them worth living. In the course of it, the program pump-primed the Philippines' dormant and doleful economy since independence into one of the most energetic in Southeast Asia. Since the program started in 1976, countless Filipino workers have ventured to far places, equipped with the right skills, fired by unwavering commitment to work hard and well, having their poor families in mind, with the determination to build a future in a country that always eluded a future, until they came along. The impact generated by their individual pursuits is immeasurable. Today, overseas Filipino workers are considered heroes not only by their fellow Filipinos, but also by their host communities. It is only right that we honor them in true Blas Ople style, by continuing to fight for their protection and rights, particularly in this unprecedented pandemic challenge. The Department of Foreign Affairs has, especially in Ople's time as Foreign Secretary, provided timely and comprehensive support to our OFWs. Through the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs and our global network of embassies and consulates, the DFA has repatriated 456,000 OFWs and counting. On the policy side, the DFA has been steady in concretizing better migrant protection, both on the international and domestic levels. In 2018, after the UN New York Permanent Representative Office led in its crafting, the UN adopted the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. Knowing it can never be international law, the NYPM argued for it as encapsulating the human sense of decency in treating others, especially migrants who are the most vulnerable to abuse. This is better than trying to get it legislated universally. Its aim is to promote better migration practices, ethical recruitment, respect for the human rights of migrants, and stronger anti-human trafficking campaigns. We followed with a Republic Act creating the Department of Migrant Workers. It is the first law in the world that codifies the progressive realization of the 23 objectives of the Global Compact. This will create a new government agency, consolidating existing key offices with migration-related functions into a single, hopefully streamlined entity, as good at the job as the DFA has been, overtaxed as it is with purely diplomatic concerns. The law defines ethical recruitment that, we hope and pray, will be honored in the practice more than in the breach. I'm not holding my breath. Without the inspiration of Blas, whose legacy is kept alive by his daughter Susan and the center bearing his name, none of this would have happened. There would still be overseas Filipino workers, but totally at the non-existent mercy of unscrupulous Filipino recruiters and of their foreign masters who will see them and treat them as slaves. I sincerely thank Susan and the Blas Ople Policy Center for being the key partner of the DFA in upholding the third pillar of Philippine foreign policy. The DFA will continue to uphold that pillar diplomatically and in real practical terms. The new department cannot do this job. Diplomacy is the DFA's exclusive remit, and helping and protecting overseas Filipinos remains our job, our duty, and our honor. Thank you.
On behalf of the Labor Department, I joined the Blas F. Ople Policy Center and Training Institute and the BusinessMirror in commemorating the birth anniversary of former Labor and Employment Minister Blas F. Ople. We, the men and women of today's Labor Department, recognize the immense contribution of Ka Blas, specifically in the advancement of labor and employment in our country. He steered the Labor Department for almost 20 years as Labor Minister at the age of 40, kagaya ko, in 1967 and until 1986. His length of service is unmatched, and his trailblazing contributions to advance the interests of the Filipino working man remain unparalleled. We also recognize his pioneering achievement as the first Filipino president of the International Labor Organization. The ILO acknowledges his contributions to social justice in our country and even the international community. Among his many legacies, Dole will forever be grateful to Ka Blas for being the father of the Labor Code and for initiating the establishment of the National Manpower and Youth Council, now TESDA, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, POEA, the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, OWA, and the Philippine Labor Attaché Corps. To the family of the late Blas Ople, an illustrious labor minister, a senator, journalist, statesman, and thoughtful leader, we are one with you in honoring today the great Ka Blas. May his wisdom, his intellect, and contribution to the progress of the labor front and the country in general continue to serve the next generations to come.
Sa ngalan ng aming ama, si Ambassador Antonio L. Cabangonchua, nagpapasalamat kami sa anak ni Ka Blas Ople, ang BusinessMirror columnist na si Butch Ople, at kami ang pinili niyang kasama sa proyektong ito na tumatalakay sa Philippine Overseas Employment, past, present, and future, ngayong araw ng kapanganakan ni Ka Blas. Habang buhay kaming magpapasalamat sa malalim na pagkakaibigan ni ALC at si Ka Blas na tumuwid sa iba't ibang yugto ng kanilang mga buhay. Si Ka Blas, isang periodista at manunulat at isang haligi ng Philippines Graphic ng ALC Group, ay naging Labor Secretary, Premier ng Saligang Batas, at Foreign Affairs Secretary. Nagsilbi rin siyang inspirasyon sa mga kabataan nang itatag niya ang National Manpower and Youth Council, ang pinagmulan ng TESDA, na talaga namang nagbibigay ng mas magandang tsansa sa mga Pilipino upang magkaroon ng trabaho. Ang aking ama ay isang shoeshine boy na naging CPA at napakasipag na manggagawa at negosyante. Nagtatag ng mga kumpanyang nagbigay ng trabaho sa libu-libong tao at tumulong sa ekonomiya. Naniniwala ako na magkatulad talaga sila sa maraming bagay. Kaya naman naging malapit sila sa isa't isa. Habang kami lumalaki, nakikita namin ang pagiging malapit ni Ka Blas at ng aking ama. Isang simpleng insidente lamang ang nais kong ibahagi dito bilang patunay ng kanilang magandang samahan. Noon si Ka Blas ay senador na. May isang sorority sa UST kung saan ako nag-aral noon sa College of Law na gusto siyang maging panauhin. Malit lamang ang event nila, kung kaya't ako'y hindi siguradong mapapaunlakan ng siya'y nagpatulong sa akin, yung sorority na nagpatulong sa akin, na-imbitahin sa Ka Blas. Nakiusap ako sa ama ko na siya ang mag-imbita kay Ka Blas. Dumating siya, walang mga banners na sumulubong. Ako lamang ang sumulubong sa kanya. Subalit, napakasiya ni Ka Blas na pagbigyan niya ang mga estudyante. Hindi raw siya makakatanggi kahit kailan sa isang kaibigan sa katauhan ng aking ama. Hindi ko akalain na ganong kamahal ni Ka Blas ang tatay ko. Pagkatapos ng event, ako ay tinawag ng amin din sa College of Law at siya'y namangha kung bakit ganong kalakas daw ako. Masaya ako at aking pamilya at aking mga kapatid na nagpatuloy ang relasyon ng aking apa at of course kay Ka Blas sa pangunguna ng mga anak niya. Si Ople at si Konsehal sa Bulacan, si Atty. Dalisay Ople. At kami naimbitahan nyo sa proyektong ito. Masaya kaming makipagdiwang sa araw na ito na gumugunita sa isang dakilang tao. Mabuhay ka, Ka Blas. Salamat sa lahat na nagawa mo para sa bayan at patuloy naming ipagbubunyi ang iyong mga alaala at mga aral na iniwan. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Secretaries Locsin and Bello and Sir Edgard for taking the time out to prepare these messages. The Blas Ople Center and Training Institute prepared a video tribute for Ka Blas. Let's watch this.
Ipinararangal namin ang kanyang pagiging ama ng aming tahanan dahil siya ay napakabuting tao. Laging nangangaral siya na maging honest sa lahat ng bagay, pakikisama sa pagtupad ng tungkulin. Ika nga, iisa lang naman ang Blas Ople. Iisa lang siya.
Philippine-Indonesia bilateral relationship is, as you know, one of the strongest pillars of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
For human traffickers and abusive employers, a domestic worker is an object, a tool to be used, not a person entitled to human dignity, respect, and honor. For her 5 children, Leah is the best mother one can hope for. To them, she is a hero, the pillar of their household. Sadly, that role of a mother, woman, and worker entitled to human rights was disregarded by her employers.
Nung dumating ako, nananakit na po sila. Tapos, tumakas nga po ako noon, pumunta ako ng agency. Binalik po ako sa amo ko. Tapos noon po, tuloy-tuloy na po yung pananakit nila sa akin. Yung ginawa po sa akin ng amo ko, yung sa CR po ako natutulog. Sinasaktan po ako ng parang hayop na kinakadena. Tapos inuuntog po yung ulo sa mga pader kung anong mga bagay po yung pinapano sa akin. Dalangin lang po talaga sa Panginoon. Tsaka yung mga anak ko po, inisip ko na kailangan ko pa po silang makita. Gusto ko pa po silang makasama.
Leah returned to the Philippines in February 2021. The Philippine Embassy is pursuing a case against her abusive employer in Syria.
Nagtapon po ako ng basura noon. Yun po yung pagkakataon na nakatakas ako. Meron pong isang Syriana na nakita po ako. Lumapit po siya sa akin. At tinulungan niya po akong dalhin sa police station. Hinabili niya po ako doon na pauwiin daw po ako tsaka wag daw po akong sasaktan. Iuwi daw po ako sa Pilipinas para po sa mga anak ko. 5 kulungan po ang napuntahan ko hanggang makapunta po ako ng embassy. Pagdating po ng embassy, humingi po ako ng tulong na makauwi para po makita ko na yung pamilya ko. Kasi 7 taon po akong walang tawag. Hindi po nila alam na buhay pa ako. Nag-aalala po yung pamilya ko. Wala po sila kahit anong komunikasyon sa akin.
We admire Leah for fighting. There was pressure on her upon her return to withdraw. And the pressure even came from people around her. But to her credit, she said, no, I will fight and I will pursue justice. And so we are helping her recover and we are helping her regain her confidence and know that she is not isolated. She's valued not just by her children but by the community and by the country. That's what we want to restore to her.
Leah is starting a new chapter as an entrepreneur with the livelihood assistance provided by the Ople Center and the San Miguel Corporation's Community Reselling Program.
Yung tulong po nila sa amin, okay po kasi nabigyan po kami ng pang-umpisa ng pangkabuhayan para po sa sa pamilya. Hanggang ngayon po, maayos ko pong aayos yung negosyo na naibigay po nila sa amin. Kaya patuloy po namin pa didiretso ang pagninegosyo. na tinulong po nila sa amin. Nagpapasalamat po ako ng sobra-sobra sa naibigay po nilang pangkabuhayan. Tsaka maraming salamat din po dahil tinulungan po nila kaming mga OFW na bigyan ng pag-asang ulit na makaahon sa buhay.
Being in this position to help severely exploited women, I'd say it's my privilege. It's the privilege of the Ople Center. And it's a mission that the pain of those that we have helped and are helping is also our pain. And their success is also our success.
Okay. For today's coffee club, we will discuss two topics: remembering Ka Blas and understanding the Department of Migrant Workers. To make this forum more interesting for our viewers, we will have a contest come raffle. I will be asking 4 questions during the forum, and the first person to answer the question correctly will have a chance to win a multi-purpose kitchen rack and an electric water kettle with 4 liters capacity. To join the contest, all you have to do is follow the Facebook pages of Business Mirror, Philippines Graphic, and Cook Magazine. Share the coffee club discussion and comment your answer with a hashtag. For example, your answer is OFW, you should have a hashtag OFW. Okay? All winners will be announced at the end of the forum. So here's our first Bueno Mano question for this morning. And you will get the chance to win we have 4 prizes for today. And the question is, how old would Blas Ople be if he were still alive today? Again, how old would Blas Ople be if he were still alive today? Don't forget to push the hashtag before your answer and to like and follow our pages. Okay, let's move on to the first panel discussion. Joining us today to talk about remembering Ka Blas, here are former Labor Secretary Marianito Roque, former DFA Undersecretary Rafael Seguis, Senior Reporter Butch Fernandez of BusinessMirror, who covers the Senate, and Ms. Susan Toots V. Ople, President of the Blas Ople Policy Center. Good morning, everyone.
Magandang umaga po.
Good morning!
Good morning po. I hope you're doing well today. So can I ask all of you first to give an opening statement? Can we start with Secretary Nitoy?
Well, maraming salamat po for having been invited to join this forum today. It's a great event for us to commemorate the works of Ka Blas Ople. We started with him when we were still young cadets in our 20s in the 1970s. When I joined the department, the Ministry of Labor then in 1976, and he was our boss. You can only look with awe and admiration at the man that you can only see on black and white TV in those days. And when you hear the booming voice, talagang idol ang dating sa amin. All right? That's why we are really taking time off today. And, we have been commemorating this birthday for as long as I can remember. Since he passed away, and we normally meet at libingan ng mga bayani. So on this occasion, I'll be more than happy to discuss the past, the present, and the future of overseas employment, which is the legacy of Ka Blas, which is being perfected today with the Department for Overseas Migrant Workers that has just been created. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you. Sir, would you like to do your presentation now or later na po?
Sige, I can proceed with it now. All right? Sige.
Yes, we can talk about it more later.
Sige. So, can I proceed now with the...
Yes, sir.
All right. Can somebody... I sent the PowerPoint earlier yesterday. Okay.
Yes, ito na po, sir.
Ayan na po. So, this is the overseas employment that we learned. Ito ang tinuro sa amin ni Ka Blas. And let me start by showing what was the situation then in the 1970s, especially in 1974, when the 442 or the Labor Code of the Philippines was developed, and that gave birth to the Philippine Overseas Employment Program. Prior to this, overseas employment was just an event that happened. No? There was only a small office then that managed it, the Office for Special Services under the Office of Minister Ople, before 1974. What was the prevailing atmosphere then that pushed for the creation or for the imagination of Ka Blas to have an overseas employment program? Number one, we have a 4% unemployment rate, no? 3.9% in 1975. The population growth rate at that time was very high, 2.8% out of 40 million Philippine population in 1974. We had surplus in the labor force. The minimum wage was 8 pesos per day. No? And the exchange rate was 7 pesos to 1 US dollar. So it's like earning 1 US dollar per day, 26 working days in a month. It's like earning $26 a month. That was the wage environment that was prevailing in 1974. We have very experienced, talented, skilled labor coming from the American establishments. The three oil refineries at the time of Caltex, Shell, and Standard Vacuum Oil or ESSO. We have temporary employment in Vietnam and Guam, and there were no specific controls. There is no control for departure. There is no system of recording. There were no contracts to speak of. People just leave through the travel agencies that act as employment agents to work in this to work for the American employers in Vietnam and Guam. And the overseas employment program was defined as a stopgap measure to siphon the surplus in the labor force so that we can control we can minimize the unemployment rate in the Philippines. So that gave rise to the overseas employment program, that kind of a situation in 1974. On the next slide, we will see the new labor markets that was developed. And nowhere will you see Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, or Dubai as we know it now. No, Singapore. This is nowhere in sight. We started then with Papua New Guinea, where we sent a lot of vocational trainers after they gained the independence from Australia. We sent a lot of Filipino professionals to work in Nigeria, especially in the universities. Doctors, nurses, professionals, teachers, even science and physics teachers were going to Nigeria at that time. Iran in 1974 was in boom because of the presence of the Americans, and most of the workers working in Subic, Clark, and Sangley Point were all taken in by American companies servicing the naval and air force bases in Iran. At the time, in about 1976, we had about the top of over 40,000 Filipinos working in Iran. And then Hong Kong was starting to hire domestic workers. Hong Kong has been a traditional employment site for Filipino domestic workers because at that time they would not want to entertain the entry of Chinese nationals working in Hong Kong. Surprisingly, Austria came into the picture when they started hiring Filipino nurses for the municipality of Vienna. At its tops, we had about 7,000 nurses that were employed in the 70s in Austria. These are now retired and are permanently living in Austria. Saipan also became a destination for construction workers, again because of the presence of American construction companies in Saipan. And if you can see, majority of our OFWs at that time, at the onset, were professionals, teachers, civil servants, doctors, and nurses. The story of Iran is the story of an unintended demand for household workers because as the European companies, especially the Italians, the Belgians, and the French companies started doing business in Iran, they requested for service workers, household workers to take care of their families while they are at work in Iran. With the overthrow of the Pahlavi dynasty in 1979, these employers took their household workers with them back to Europe. And that started the inflow of the service workers in Europe, especially in Italy. The seed of the Filipino household workers in Italy that you have now was actually the overseas workers in Iran who transferred there together with their employers, were able to get their work permits and their residence permit, as we call it, the permesso di lavoro and the permesso di soggiorno. And then the emergence of Italy as a destination for Filipino workers. So you can see these are not the usual destination states that we see now for our Filipino overseas workers, maybe with the exception of Hong Kong. The next slide. Ka Blas was also instrumental in teaching us to adopt the standards for overseas employment. And we were the first country in the world who was a source of migration to adopt and be strict with the labor standards that must be followed to qualify for employing a Filipino worker. And we are talking of free travel to and from the work site, free board and lodging, emergency medical and dental coverage, the guaranteed basic wage, overtime pay at no less than the overtime pay in the Philippines, workmen's compensation coverage, a grievance machinery where there is a participation of the Philippine Labor Attaché before the such grievance is elevated to the local courts at the worksite, the repatriation of workers for war, hostilities in the event of accidental or natural death, and a guarantee of workers' protection at no less than what is prevailing at the worksite. And lastly, the only country that has an employer's enrollment system, or we call it the verification of the employer and the authentication of the employment contract. In this manner, the worker is given protection by ensuring that there is a real employer, that all the requirements for labor standards are met before an employment can be approved and before they can proceed to the worksite. All of this contents, the 9 out of 10 elements are contained still in the model employment contract today that is being required by the POEA for every departing Filipino worker before they allow the travel and employment to any foreign country. So you can see this standard is almost 50 years old now, right? But this was the seed, this was the idea that was imposed upon us by Ka Blas. The next is the policy shift. What happened between the 1980s and 1990s? First, in the onset in the 1970s, the spirit was that there would be a state placement agency, which was the Overseas Employment Development Board and the National Seaman Board. This was reversed with the reorganization of the DOLE, and there was a merger of the 3 agencies: the Overseas Employment Development Board, the National Seaman Board, and the Bureau of Employment Services in 1982. The emergent Department for Overseas Migrant Workers that we see now is a remake. It is a remake of the reorganization of the DOLE that we passed through in 1982. It is difficult. It is very challenging. People are very uncooperative, but somehow we were able to get through it, and we were able to proceed with whatever it is now. I'm not saying that the organization of a new department will be difficult, but there are issues and challenges, starting with the personnel, the operations, the external environment, and even the labor markets. In the 1980s also, there was now an increased dependence on private fee-charging employment agencies. I refer to this as the private fee-charging employment agencies because this is exactly what was expressed as a provision in the labor code. And then the exclusion of travel agencies in the overseas employment program. The reason being that the overseas employment program started with the travel agencies actually. When they were sending nurses to America on a fly now, pay later plan, where the agencies earned their income. So there were no recruitment agencies before, even to Guam, even to Saipan, or even to Vietnam. This was the business of travel agencies that earned out of the ticketing, out of the fly now, pay later program, but not in the recruitment. But somehow they were excluded in the overseas employment program. This was an exact qualification in the labor code. And then you have the creation in 1982 of the POEA, then under Pat Santo Tomas, the Welfare Fund for Overseas Workers under Salvador Bigay, which later evolved to be what you call now as the OWA, or the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration. In the 1980s, we also developed the Custodial Center, or what you call now the POLO, or the labor centers abroad, as the place where the workers can seek grievance, can seek assistance, can seek comfort. Because before this, we have seen already that there will be some increasing population of overseas workers, and they need somebody to take care of them, and this cannot be accommodated by simply the Office of the Labor Attaché. Hence, there was for the first OWA centers that were created, which later on were strengthened and more formalized by the succeeding laws, or 8042. Flor contemplation was a lesson for everyone in the migration program, that the manpower export, or overseas employment, or employment for migration, as you may call it, is not a simple commodity export program. What it means, what we learn from Flor Contemplacion is that they should be taken care of as human beings. They have to be communicated with, and agencies must have the responsibility, the continuing responsibility to attend to the workers that they deploy until the day that return to their families on Philippine soil. That is the lesson learned from Flor Contemplacion. You don't simply lead them out. You don't simply lead them to the employers. It is not a business. It is a system of caring. It's a system that must be governed by rules, by laws, and by human relations. And lastly, the Gulf War of 1991, where we had several hostages that were taken, the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, the first mass repatriation of Filipinos, about 28,000 then within a period of 3 months, to take them away from the war zone. The hostages, the three Filipino hostages, Angelo de la Cruz and Tarongoy, uh, where we had to pay for the cost of their freedom. None of these hostages were freed for free. There was always a cost. In the case of Angelo de la Cruz, we had to remove the Philippine army contingent in Kuwait that was assisting in the multi-nation forces then in Kuwait. And it cost us some political fallouts with the removal of our participation in Kuwait. Again, there were fees that were also paid for their freedom. Next. Recent development. Okay. So we go now to the present times. What we have now is an enlarged market predominantly for household service workers, and a new set of regulations which requires that they have to be at least 24 years old. There's no placement fee. There's free travel provision before they're allowed to go. And they have to undergo a pre-departure orientation seminar. We have lost the drive to provide for skilled workers, for the more professional, for the less problematic type of workers. And there is a proliferation now of recruitment agencies that solely specialize on household workers. This development calls for a new environment, a new set of regulations that will govern the employment of DOMUS, domestic household workers, entirely different from the professionals. What we have now in as far as rules is concerned is only a derivative of the rules for the professional and skilled workers. This needs some overhaul, some study so that a new regulation or a new regimen must be imposed for the employment of household service workers. The possession of travel documents is now required. In the earlier days, the passport is normally being taken by the employer, if not the employer, the overseas or the foreign recruitment agencies. If it's being held by the workers, some of them are being used as collateral for loans, which is not allowed. And many workers fell victim to this, especially in Hong Kong and in Dubai, where lending companies offer loans left and right in exchange for the passport so that the workers cannot leave the work site even if they have finished their employment contract. Removal of the kapala is a contentious issue. Many friends in the industry and even in the government are so happy with the removal of the kafala system or sponsorship system. But for us who have grown for years in this industry, we see the other side of the issue on the kafala. You see, in the most countries in the Middle East operate on a system of a sponsorship for you to be able to enter their states or their boundaries. Somebody from a national, their national must sponsor your entry, and uniquely somebody that same person must sponsor your exit. All right. Coupled with this is the accreditation process or the employer enlistment program that we have as a polo system, which means that before a foreign employer can employ a Filipino, there has to be a vouching system, an inspection, verification to make sure that there is a true employer, that employer is truthful to the contents of the contract, that there will be a visa that is available, and that the worker will be protected. With the removal of the kafala, the worker will now have the freedom to transfer employer once they arrive at the worksite in as many times as possible as they wish, which means we will lose track of the employer. The POLO or the Department of Migrant Workers, as it may come to be, will no longer have control of the employment. They have nobody to run after. There is no registration system of the employer. And if there would be an employer-employee dispute, there is no means to mediate. The process of mediation might eventually be taken over by the local labor officers at the country worksite. We will lose our participation and control in the employment program. That is the adverse effect of the removal of the kafala, because the employers need not be known to us, and they don't have that obligation to be known, to be registered, and to be approved by the labor attaché. The end is that your welfare costs will go up. And eventually, if no resolution is found in an employer-employee dispute, you will have to repatriate the worker. So whether it is now the DFA or the Department for Migrant Workers, your cost will run high in as far as repatriation cost, in as far as welfare cost is concerned. What you will have is that you will have many people seeking custody at the custodial centers and then leaving the centers on their own free will to find employment in the local labor market. We lose the control. That is the adverse effect of the removal of the kafala. The new development is mega recruitment, where there is now labor market consolidation at the work site. All right? It is good in one sense because it will reduce the cost of welfare, the cost of protection, the cost of custody, because the POLO can require, or the Department for Migrant Workers for that purpose, can require the mega recruiter to have all the facilities that is usually now being provided by the POLO, including the custodial center, the free meals, etc., etc. All right? But contrary, they might establish a cabal, they might establish a cartel such that the labor market will now be controlled by them, and they will now dictate the labor standards, they will dictate the wages, they will dictate the quantity And the mega recruitment will have the control on the distribution of employment opportunities to whoever can provide the better employment terms and conditions from their point of view, not from the point of view of the sending state or from the sending agencies, but whatever is more beneficial to them from a commercial point of view. And lastly, the development now is the Department of Overseas Migrant Workers. It's a welcome development because now somebody will be taking care of them, of the workers, at a higher level instead of now simply assigning it to OWA and then assigning the control to POEA. But there are gaps that are quite visible in as far as litigation is concerned, in as far as cases management is concerned. Because one possible objection that could come out is that you will have one department, which would be the police, the regulator, the fiscal, the judge, all at the same time. So there will be no check and balances. So there should be some very sharp watchdog that will look over the way that this will be managed, the cases and the issues will be managed. But still, you have the challenge to keep it streamlined, to keep it thin, and keep it effective. So that will be the challenge to this new department. Okay. The next slide, which will be the last, is the shape of things to come. Given now the effects of the pandemic, what happens now to the overseas employment or the temporary migration program? One is that receiving states will be looking at the competitive advantage being offered by many nations who are sending workers. All right? Where would they benefit the most? One, of course, would be expected reduction of wages because the global business environment is not very favorable. Many will be starting over, and we cannot expect the same rate of wages that we were enjoying before. If we get the same type of wage, they may ask for multi-skilling, right? Which means that for one type of wage, which could be lower, they may be asking for 2 or 3 skill capabilities, which means that you have to have better trained, better experienced workers. So now, we cannot say that the Philippines always has the competitive advantage. No, we don't have the gold standard anymore. Because remember that Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka have been in the overseas employment game for over 2 decades already. And we cannot say that they don't know the job, that they are better than the Filipinos. Because in some extent, they do better than the Filipinos at a lower cost. So now we have to study what would be our competitive advantage as a sending state in as far as migration is concerned. Next is the cost of doing business. With new health protocols in place, they expected that the cost of doing business in as far as migrating workers will be higher. Take the case of the seafarers, no? Especially in the cruise liners, which are exposed to the public that they are serving. The health maintenance cost will be higher. And the issue here is who will shoulder the cost? The preparation, the healthcare, the protection of workers, who would be doing this? So those who would be offering workers with a competitive advantage and the least cost of doing business from an origin state would get the edge in as far as the supply of workers is concerned. Next issue is education for migration. Do we have to decide on a policy where are we going to educate our children to be overseas workers? Because if you would see now, almost 8 to 9% of your population are overseas workers. And many children are dreaming to be overseas workers, knowing that the kind of comfort, the kind of economic benefit that's being derived out of overseas employment is something that retains in their subconscious. So the issue is, will the state be spending to prepare its nationals for migration? So that should be studied by the new department, perhaps by a new administration after June this year, no? And come to a conclusion. Are we really going to be a state that's designing its nationals, its citizens, to be migrants in some other countries. We cannot say that, oh, they have to be experienced first in the Philippines. So that means the Philippines will only be your training ground. Kawawa naman ang ating local employment dito because the companies then cannot look forward to a long-term relationship dito sa atin in the Philippines with their workers if they are only thinking of getting experience and know-how from the local companies in the Philippines. The next issue is the professionalism of the migration industry. I know that there used to be some course that was started out in UP and Marianito in managing migration, but I was told that it did not prosper. No? Perhaps it's high time that we now think of, putting in. They have been talking about ethics in the migration industry, but you really have to input now professionals to manage your migration industry. It's no longer the run of the mill before where we used to have liaison officers who eventually became representatives of foreign employers, and the foreign employers provided them capital for them to put up their own recruitment agencies in the Philippines. So in the process, acting as dummies for foreign capital. Now you really have to, the new department must think now of means of professionalizing this industry because it looks like it will be here to stay. Next is the availability of supply to a changing demand situation. With this pandemic, we have seen that there was a tremendous demand for nurses. But are we going to up again our training for nurses here in the Philippines? In the late 2000, between 2000 and 2007, we were producing 70,000 nurses in the Philippines per year. But then we lost the Canadian and the American labor market, and suddenly we had a surplus of nursing graduates who passed the board and eventually landed at jobs in the call centers. We're lucky that we have the birth of the call center industry then. So these centers were able to absorb our nurses then. But now that our supply is down to like 14 to 15,000 a year, are we going to restart again our nursing program to meet the changing demand situation? Because by the time they graduate, pandemic must be over, and again, there will be an oversupply of nurses. So there has to be very conscious information. We need to have high-grade information on the changing demand situation, which brings me to the next topic, which is the need for information, research, analytics, and market adaptation. Sad to say, we are very low in as far as supply of information and quality information from the work sites. Our research is practically non-existent, and for that reason, our analytics is down. So we need all of this to prepare the government, the new department, for policy, a very respondent policy that will be responsive to market, or as I said, market adaptation, so that we can always be ahead of the changing demand situation in as far as job description, job position, competitive advantage, experience, etc. So this could be a very good seed that the new department can start with. Next is balancing the opportunities with protection. We cannot overprotect. It's good that we are protecting our workers, but we cannot overprotect to the extent of losing your labor market if you are really going into an overseas employment program. Because first, to be able to protect them, you have to find them jobs overseas. You cannot protect them if they are here, right? Because the local laws would already protect him, and we have sufficient standards and inspectors to do that here. But in as far as migration is concerned, you have to avail of the opportunities first, take advantage, ride the bandwagon before you can afford the protection. But then your protection must be able to extend beyond the territorial boundaries of the Philippines. So this is the social justice fulcrum that you have to play, especially in this new department also. Balancing the opportunities with protection. How much employment opportunities can you create, and how much would you water it down with protecting the workers such that you will define where the countries that your Filipinos can work at. Okay? Sometimes you have the advantage, you have the opportunity, sometimes you have the openings, you have Libya, you have Iraq, but then the issue of protection comes in because you cannot protect them because of the security situation in the states. So again, this is a very distinct balance that you may have to play. Okay, the next and the last is the new role of governance in migration. Will it be more or less governance? We have so many rules in as far as governance is concerned. All right? To the extent that sometimes every step that you take, you don't realize that you made a mistake already because of so many rules that we have. And rules are always changing. So the issue in as far as the new department is concerned is, are you going to put in more rules or are you going to reduce the rules? Are you going to harmonize or you just let it go? Right? Because this will have an effect on your market penetration. How much can you enter the labor markets, because it will be a different competition this time. Everybody's looking for a job overseas. And even probably the non-traditional origin states may start sending their workers to find jobs overseas because employment is not easy in the domestic front. So these are the things that you may have to contend with in the immediate future. And that future can be tomorrow, it can be weeks, it can be months, it can be a year ahead. But it's nice to work with these issues, and provided that you can move around, you can play with it, we still see a rosy picture in as far as overseas employment is concerned. Maraming salamat po. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat.
Thank you so much, Sir Nitoy. Now, can we hear from Yusek Segis? Yusek Segis, can we hear from you? You're, yeah. You're, nakamute po kayo, sir. Nakamute. We can't hear you po. Yan. Oops. Hello, sir. So, hello, sir. Wala, sir. We'll start with Sir Butch na lang first. Saan si Sir Butch? Ay. Can we, Sir Butch, ba't wala? There you are. Sir Butch, can you give us your story?
Start now?
Yes, sir.
Wala nang intro, no?
Wala na po, sir. Go ahead, sir.
From the trenches in Manila's chaotic media and labor front to a serene afternoon by Lake Geneva, Ka Blas Ople, the larger-than-life former Senate President, Foreign Affairs Secretary, Labor Secretary, Constitution Framer, was to me someone who never strayed from what I would call the essential Ka Blas Ople. Down to earth, madaling kausap, humble despite his intelligence and his largely self-fueled education. He was a few years younger than my father, Calixto Fernandez Jr., also a journalist like him, when they were starting out in the pre-martial law stable of the Times Mirror Taliba chain. My father covered City Hall for Daily Mirror and for News, and in the afternoon was made to close some pages. And Ka Blas, having displayed his ability to write well on almost any topic as a result of his expansive reading habits, he was tapped to write editorials beside covering the news. They were the quintessential hard-nosed journalists of their generation. Hardworking, intelligent, tireless, tough interviewers, but soft-hearted when writing about common folk and the marginalized. And they were excellent storytellers, especially when sharing booze with reporters at the end of a long, hard day. Ka Blas improved constantly on his last skill, thus making himself the perfect source for journalists when he went on to be a public servant with several incarnations. I did not have the chance to cover him in his long years as Labor Secretary and later as Foreign Affairs Secretary. But in between those two cabinet positions, he was a senator for many years. And it was during those years that we covered him with all the gusto that struck reporters' blood. Ka Blas was a dream interviewee. He said the best things, used the right words, told stories in an engaging manner, and unlike other news sources who just like to hear their voices, he kept one eye out on the interviewer. If he noticed that you are not writing as fast as he spoke, he would deliberately slow down or repeat some keywords. He seemed to keep that unique talent of journalists to read notes backwards, so that we were sent, so that we sent it in the Senate beat that he could read what we were writing down. Because he was such a voracious reader, understandably his vocabulary was robust. He loved using such multisyllabic words to journalists, such as impregnable, intermittent, transmogrified, and his most memorable, interregnum. We thought he deliberately used those words to play a prank on reporters to force us to run to the dictionary. If his English vocabulary was robust, so was his cabinet of Filipino words. The true son of Bulacan used the most colorful and precise words. Reporters usually remember some of his favorites: gulugod for spine and kabuktutan for anomalies. But he also used street words occasionally, and this we found amusing. On the sidelines of the ILO assembly in Geneva in mid 90s, we joined him on a brief boat ride where he wore his new pair of shoes as we had toured the Valley plant the day before and got a couple of pairs at factory price. But as we were navigating for space near the berthing line, a boat accidentally hit a post, creating a wave that sprayed water on ours. The Senate President's precious new shoes got wet with the spray. He grinned, but you could sense the disappointment as he wondered aloud. Sino bang nakausap ng kataruntaduhan ito? Of course, covering Ople without his smoking habit would not be a complete recollection of the man. If you wanted to get up close and get his private views or advanced reading of a tough legislative measure or divisive issue, the best time to do that was during his famous cigarette break at the corridor near the men's room in the old Senate building on P. Burgos. But of course, you'd have to be able to stand the feeling of a gamecock being prepped with puffs of smoke. I have covered presidents, generals, cabinet secretaries, mayors, and local warlords, but no one compares with Blas F. Ka Blas, among and Batman to Senator Boy Herrera's Robbie. He went by various monikers, but had a singular style that no one else in Philippine public service could perhaps ever match. Happy birthday, Ka Blas. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Sir Roque. Can I ask if Sir Yusek Sevis is ready for us? No, I don't think he's ready. Nawawala si Sir. Miss Toots, would you like to say something?
Yeah. First of all, it's really nice seeing all these good friends of Ka Blas and the family, and of course, starting with sila Anton and Boss Edgard and si Butch Koy. Alam ko kung sino yung merong kagagawa ng katarantaduhan na yon. But it's really and we thank Secretary Roque for that very comprehensive presentation. Ang naaalala ko lang, and si Butch will si Butch knows this very well. Kahit anong position ni Ka Blas, yung newsman in him laging lumalabas. Kasi pagising niya sa umaga, iskas niya lahat ng dyaryo just to see sinong reporter ang tama ang anggulo sa kanyang press conference. And then, naaalala ko rin na minsan magwa-one-on-one pa yan sa mga reporters para lang, and ako rin, inuutusan niya, sabihin niya, Toots, tingnan mo nga kung ano susulatin ni Butch Fernandez. So, I think yung heart niya and yung love for OFWs, it also came from yung humble origins niya, and the fact na yung school niya was really the public library, and yung calling niya was really public service. So, naalala ko lang, very short lang, nung una kaming dumapo sa Department of Foreign Affairs, may instance doon na si Ka Blas pinatawag sa Malacanang, panahon ni President GMA. Tapos doon siya nag-press conference kasi hindi siya makatanggi eh. It was about some summit or a state visit. Anyway, pagdating niya sa DFA, nagtampo yung mga reporters. So, nag-boycott sila. Binoycott nila yung press conference si Ka Blas. And naalala ko yun, sabi ni Ka Blas, bakit sila hindi pupunta? Tapos sabi niya, may lagnat siya noon. Pero kasi regular press con, talagang basta may press con, nandun siya. And siya nagsusulat ng press release niya, siya nagsusulat ng speech niya, alam yun nila Butch. Tapos, ang nangyari, nabalitaan ng mga desk, yung mga editors noon, mga malalapit kay Ka Blas, parang napagalitan din yata yung iba doon na, bakit hindi nyo sinipot? So, yun lang, yung puso kasi ng newsman will always be for the little people eh. It's always parang ganyan. Kaya, And you can feel it. And I'm so glad na we're having this forum para lang din maalala natin. So thank you po sa lahat. And later on, we'll look naman at the future now that we have seen the previous leadership and of Ka Blas. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Nandiyan na po si Yusek Segis. Hello, sir. Yes, can you give your story na po? That I can't hear. We can't hear you, sir. We can't hear you, sir.
Baka dapat may headset.
Will you, okay
Tayo?
na. He had his phone kanina. Okay naman siya. Kaso, nawawala.
Ayan, someone's assisting him.
Okay, we do this. Sige, sir. Going through the comments here sa ano. Yan. Ito yata para kay Sir Nico. Tama ba? Praying he will be appointed as the first Secretary of the MW. He knows very well that all the Philippine labor migration knows. Ayan, okay na ba si Sir?
Hello?
Yan.
Yes, sir. We can hear you now, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, po.
Yes?
Yes, okay,
Okay,
na
thank
po.
you. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this Blas F forum commemorating the 95th birth anniversary of my mentor and idol, Secretary Blas F. I am forever grateful to him. He was the one who raised me up in the midst of my diplomatic career, mostly in the Middle East, such as Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Libya, and Saudi Arabia, enabling me to climb and stand on every mountain assigned to me by his succeeding foreign secretaries in the DFA that lasted until the end of my coterminous appointment by the late President Benigno Aquino Jr. in June 2016. I was the Philippine ambassador to Indonesia when Ka Blas was appointed Secretary of Foreign Affairs in July 2002. In 2003, he asked me to join his team in the Home Office and accordingly recommended me to President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo to be appointed Undersecretary for Official Concerns to be in charge, among others, of implementing the then recently enacted Overseas Absentee Voting Act. Being a novel piece of legislation, implementing the OAV Act was a great challenge. It helped, of course, that Secretary Ople was very supportive of me and the Overseas Voting Absentee Voting Secretariat that I headed. We started the Secretariat in May or June 2003, and we only had 2 months of registration because we didn't have money until the end of 2003. And yet, we were able to register around 360,000 over the course of 2 months. Unfortunately, Secretary Blas F. Ople passed away in December 2003 and was not able to celebrate with us the successful outcome of the overseas voting for the 2004 national elections. The maiden implementation of OAV, which BFO spearheaded, retains to this day the record of having the highest percentage of overseas voters turn out at 65% of the 360,000 registered voters. Today, in commemoration of the 95th anniversary of Secretary Blas F. Ople, we are exchanging our personal memories and anecdotes of his greater-than-life persona and enduring legacies as a public servant. But remembering Ka Blas more than
is more than just recounting the achievements or reminiscing the indelible memories we had with him. We can all agree that the best way to remember Ka Blas is to continue life's work. We all know that BFO, si Ka Blas, was the working man's champion. He is the father of the labor code, created what is now TESDA, and established the POEA and OWA, which are the DFA's partners in pursuing one of its foreign policy pillars, the protection of the rights and interests of overseas Filipinos, particularly of particularly the OFWs. Ka Blas initiated overseas employment in 1976 in response to the economic realities back then. 45 years since then, the wave of overseas employment remains strong, and the OFWs remain to be an important contributor to our national economy. Much of the DEP's work is centered on protecting migrant workers. I found myself often at the forefront of this advocacy, at times at the risk of life and limb. I would like to mention briefly the two kidnapping incidents that I could not forget while carrying out the legacy of Secretary Blas F. Ople. These are the kidnapping of Angelo de la Cruz and the kidnapping of Roberto Tarongo in Baghdad. In both incidents, I was tasked to head, the team to negotiate with the kidnappers for the release, having served in Baghdad from 1992 to 1996 as Philippine ambassador. Angelo de la Cruz was kidnapped near Fallujah while transporting fuel from Saudi Arabia on July 7, 2004 by Iraqi insurgents fighting a US-led overthrow of Saddam Hussein. He was released on July 20, 2004 after then President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, upon my recommendation, and the Secretary of Affairs then Delia Albert, to save the life of Angelo, made the decision to withdraw the Philippine military contingent in Iraq in exchange for his release, in accordance with the demand of the kidnappers. About 3 months after the release of Angelo de la Cruz, Roberto Tarongoy, an accountant for a Saudi company based in Riyadh, was captured or abducted on November 1st, 2004, along with American Ray Halloms from their office in a residential district of Baghdad after a gun battle that killed an Iraqi guard and an attacker. The abductors, the abductors demanded that the government or the Philippine government pull out more than 6,000 Filipino workers in Iraq and stop supporting the US military presence there. Most most of those abducted in Iraq then were seized by criminal gangs who sold them to militant groups. These militant groups then made political demands or asked for ransom. To make a long story short, Robert Tarongoy was finally released on June 23, 2005, after almost 8 months of long and arduous negotiations with his abductors. I hope that the Department of Migrant Affairs will be able to live up to what the DAV has done all these years in protecting migrant workers. Remembering Ka Blas is very timely at this critical time when the national elections is just few months away. It was during the Blas F. Ople's time as Secretary of Foreign Affairs that overseas voting was first implemented. This year, migrant workers will once again get the chance to participate in electing their national leaders through the overseas voting system. There are about 1.6 million registered overseas voters, many of whom are OFWs. The working class, which has been the center of Ka Blas' life's work, will once again take the center stage. The working man's voice in the coming elections is a legacy of Amang Ka Blas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusek Segis. We would have wanted to entertain questions, but we are running out of time. So we'd like to say thank you once again to Secretary Roque, Yusek Segis, Sir Butch, for spending your precious time with us. So before we move on to the second panel discussion, let's watch this first. Okay, we are back, and here's a chance to win an electric. We are back again, and here's a chance to win to be part of our raffle. So the second question is, what beat does Butch Fernandez of Business Mirror cover? So don't forget to put your hashtag, and then your answer in the comment section. Okay, so let's move on to the second panel discussion on understanding the Department of Migrant Workers. The guests for this segment, which will be facilitated by the Scoots, our Foreign Affairs Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs, Sara Arriola, POA Administrator Bernard Olalia, Administrator Hans Leo Kakdak, uh, Overseas, Overseas Workers Affairs Administrator, and Attorney Marianito of ASEAN AP. Good morning po everyone. There. Okay, good morning po.
Yes.
And si Yusek po will give her message first.
Um, good morning, everyone. It's almost 12 o'clock. Of course, thank you very much. And of course, Ma'am Toots, thank you for inviting me to celebrate the life of your legendary father. Colleagues in government, of course, and all the ones listening to us, good morning. I prepared a very short PowerPoint presentation regarding Department of Migrant Workers. We had the privilege to closely work with the House of Representatives and also the Senate in crafting this law. So can we begin? The Department of Migrant Workers Act is something that we're very proud of. And coming this May in the first International Migration Review Forum in New York in the United Nations, we're going to town with it because of many things. It's one of we're very proud of the law. First slide, please. Okay, I only have 3 points. First, it's a trailblazing legislation. Second, the success of the DMW will really depend on the next administration. Third, it is a fulfillment of a campaign promise. Okay, on the first point, it is a trailblazing legislation by including the 23 objectives of the Global Compact for Migration in its declaration of policies. I think it's very, very important to know that in 2018, we adopted the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, which was also adopted by 152 countries. And going into its first review in the UN this May, we are very proud that we are the first country in the world that placed in our domestic legislation a soft law. Secretary Locsin mentioned a while ago that we said that it is a norm of morality, the Global Compact, but now since it's part of the Declaration of Principles, we are saying that it is going to be the basis of our policies in the succeeding years when it comes to migration. It has to be emphasized that this is not a labor export law. It's a migration law, or Department of Migrant Workers is really for a safe, orderly, and regular migration. I often talk to my counterparts in the Middle East, and they say that we like talking to foreign affairs because it's more of, you are giving us more of a migration perspective than a labor perspective, in a sense that it's not just getting jobs, but it's more of protection. But we have to also say that in the 23 objectives of the Global Compact, we talk about human rights, fair and ethical recruitment, labor mobility, and of course, decent work. And these are all in the law. But of course, it will really depend very, very much on who will be able to implement it. Next slide, please. Okay, the Department of Migrant Workers will rise and fall with the new administration. Well, actually, it's quite very timely because today, the Department of Migrant Workers Act takes effect as of today. But then, what's going to happen in the whole year? Actually, all the subsumed agencies will be on a holdover capacity, except that we expect the President to appoint a secretary or acting secretary anytime soon because there are really timelines that have to be met. On March 5, there should be already a department order on the use of action funds, which is similar to ATN and LAF of DFA. On April 4, there should already be an IRR. And on April 19, there should be a publication of the implementing rules and regulations. In June 3, there should be a staffing pattern. And then at the same time, the submission of the budget of the new department. This is like foundation of the Department of Migrant Workers that will be really depend, and the next administration will really depend on this transition committee. It's very important, of course, that there is someone who will lead and will constitute the transition committee to be able to provide for this foundational measures or foundational documents for the implementation of the law. But I've said that why the next administration? The next administration, because the new department will not function without an adequate budget. And it is also said in the law that it will only be constituted having first, it has a budget for 2023. It has an implementing rules and regulations, and there is a staffing pattern. So technically, it will really depend on the political will of the next president and how much the next administration will value migration and our OFWs. But what I can say is whoever he or she would be, that person will have very big shoes to fill. Because in the Duterte administration, there was so much emphasis on the protection of our migrant workers. In effect, that anywhere I go internationally, we are second to none when it comes to migrant protection. And secondly, we are the gold standard of migrant protection. In fact, it is the first time in the history of the DFA that we were given a 1 billion ATM fund and 200 million legal assistance fund. And during the height of the pandemic, we were given an additional 870 million for repatriation. So of course, that's a very little amount compared to what was given to OWA and other government agencies to take care of our migrant workers. So you can see that the premium that this administration has given to our OFWs. But of course, we may have a good law, but it will really depend on the implementation. So we will be very dependent on the next secretary for after June 30 and the undersecretaries and assistant secretaries of the new department, and also how much budget and how much resources the new department will be given. So we are await. That's something that really, as of now, hangs in the balance. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Lastly, it is a fulfillment of a campaign promise. In 2016, this was part of the Duterte Cayetano promise that there's going to be a new department, a one-stop shop for all OFWs. It's very important, because the DMW will take care of both the documented and undocumented workers, regular and irregular. So domestically, all they have to do is, I assume that the base of this department will be in the POEA. So from pre-employment, employment, even reintegration, it's all under one roof, and it will be very easy for migrant workers to just go to one place, and even there will be already a transfer where they will get their end of service benefits. So as to fast, responsive, and adequate assistance, we are expecting a lot from this new department. But of course, like any other department that's going to have several departments merged, this is like 7 agencies under one roof, there will be like growing pains, and there will be, of course, a lot of adjustment at the onset. But of course, DFA stands ready to assist because the ATN and LAF will still remain with DFA to take care of all those posts where there are still no migrant workers office, and to, as Secretary Locsin would say, that if ever they do not have enough funds or if they do not have enough presence, the DFA will still be there. And of course, this is limited only to migrant workers, and the other overseas Filipinos will still stay with DFA. So preliminarily, that's my take on the DMW, but this is a very good step in the right direction. I think this will be our basis, also a model for a textbook case on how to implement the GCM and how to move it forward from a country. And also, the DMW is something that I was in the Middle East last December, and I was able to talk to my counterparts from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. And we already mentioned this, and this is also a welcome development to countries of destination. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
the for that very informative presentation. I hope you have time to answer a few questions. Now let's proceed to POEA, the backbone of this new department, and we thank Admin Olalia for being with us. Admin Olalia,
Thank
do
you,
you have,
Ma'am Toots.
yes,
Good
do you have,
afternoon to you and to everyone.
yes, do
Good
you have a
afternoon to my
presentation po?
colleagues. Uh, Brief introduction lang po muna. And then I
Okay,
will be ready to answer some of your comments and share some insights.
thank you.
First of all, let me thank Business Mirror and Blas Ople Center for inviting me and being a part of this very important occasion, being the 95th birth anniversary of Ka Blas, no? February 3 is a very important day for the Department of Migrant Workers. This is the day of the effectivity of the Department of Migrant Workers Act. No? And interestingly, it comes as a surprise that February 3 is also the birth anniversary of Ka Blas. No? It's pure luck or coincidence, call it that way, but this is a fitting tribute to Ka Blas, the father of the labor code. I was listening a while ago to Sec Mitoy when he was discussing the history of our overseas employment industry. And I learned for the first time that the standards of labor that we now apply in the regular standard employment contracts comes from the mind of Ka Blas. No? It really baffles me that this guy has contributed a lot to the overseas employment industry. Again, I'm here to discuss some points of the DMW and be ready to answer some of the queries. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Admin Olalia. And alam mo, ang dami ng questions na kalinya sa iyo, ha? Next, we go to a good friend also of the Ople Center, Admin Hans Kakda. Admin Hans, are you with us?
Yes, magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Ms. Toots, Ople, and the Blas F Ople Center and Business Mirror and our dear friend, brother agency, Admin Bernard, and of course our dear Undersecretary of the Office of Migrant Workers Affairs, Ms. Sara, who's also a member of the OWA Board of Trustees. Happy 95th birthday kay Ka Blas. Sinabi ko na yata yung sagot sa tanong. Ako pa nanalo ng prize. Ako ba? I also have some bits of information about the legacy of Ka Blas. Ka Blas is a visionary. He is a chief architect and pioneer implementer of the Overseas Employment Program of Government of our nation, or what some international entities call our Migration Management Program. He designed the basic framework, which still exists to this day, for OFW protection. He did not design a Parthenon, which just stands as a tourist spot these days, but still a structure where OFWs metaphorically and maybe even literally seek solace, seek protection. It was LOI 537 in 1977 where the OWA was instituted through a welfare and training fund. And this, you can see the kind of visionary Ka Blas was. Back then, 1977, which is what, the 45th year? He already designed a framework for OFW welfare and protection, number one. And number two, he had the foresight to determine the sustainability of the effort. That's why there was a welfare and training fund instituted. And of course, it's not just a welfare fund, but a training fund to develop the skills base of OFWs and future OFWs because as far back as 1977, Ka Blas saw skills as the foremost measure of protection. It's almost unfathomable to think that someone like Ka Blas thought of these things way before everybody else came in. In 1983, Ka Blas designed, it was a Labor Day enactment. By the way, LOI 537 was also a Labor Day enactment during the Marcos era. But in 1983, Ka Blas, that was what, 39 years ago, Ka Blas designed a one-stop shop documentation and processing center for OFW. And this already laid the seeds of what we have now, which is the one-stop shop for OFWs, which carries over even to the COVID effort because we still have even a one-stop shop of various government agencies that caters to the smooth and safe transition of returning OFWs. And beginning today, the count stands at 913,000 protected under this one-stop shop framework, which has its origins as far back as 1983. Of course, if we really want to go further back, we go back to 1974, the Labor Code of the Philippines, PD 442 at the time, where already the seeds of the migration management program were planted, most especially the matter on protection of OFWs through an ethical and safe recruitment system. That time, a government recruitment and placement program was put in place to the Overseas Development Board, Overseas Employment Development Board. Lastly, the legacy of Ka Blas, bringing in the right people. One of my favorite stories of the pioneers of my atis and kuyas in the Dole when I entered in 2001 was Ka Blas put out an ad 1974, 1975, I forget the story, but this was then USEC Minda Padilla and then USEC the late Lily Pineda who told me these stories. Put out an ad seeking, soliciting job applicants to work for the department under the new labor code. And lo and behold, you would be surprised or at least fascinated by those who answered this call. Former Secretary Pat Santo Tomas, former Secretary Benny Laguesma, former Secretary Nitoy Roque, former Secretary Ruben Torres, former Secretary Art Brion, now then eventually Supreme Court Justice, former Secretary Linda Baldos, and a host of all other future government officials, and in the case of OWA, future OWA administrators officials who laid again the seeds, designed the initial framework for OFW protection, welfare protection through the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration. Such is the legacy of Ka Blas. And when I wish to say that these days all of us at OWA stand on the shoulders of giants, I mean to say our kuyas and ates at the Dole whom I just mentioned, but most especially the giant of them all, Ka Blas Ople. So we're very thankful, and it's only fitting that the Blas F Ople Center honors Ka Blas today. I had the honor of meeting him once. We were preparing for Labor Day in 2001. I was so starstruck, I couldn't say a word. Pinakilala ko ni Miss Lily Pineda at then Yusek Lily. We went to his office at Marbella. I forget the name of the building.
Marbella.
Marbella, yes. Thank you, Miss Toots. And there I met Ka Blas. Okay, that leaves me with just a few minutes on the Department of Migrant Workers. But I would just like to say that under this new department, which incidentally, we dug it up, Miss Toots. There was once an Senate Bill 2071 in the 90s. Senators Herrera and Ople, then Senator Ople, co-authored a bill designing a Department of Migrant Workers Employment. So again, you see the foresight of Ka Blas. And of course, Ka Blas was a senator and chair of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, which jointly crafted what is still the framework for OFW protection the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 that was amended in 2010. So with this Department of Migrant Workers, the OWA will stay on as an attached agency. Let me quote the exact wording under the new law. Under Section 20, we are attached, the OWA is, to the Department for purposes of policy and program coordination. And the OWA shall continue to function in accordance with our charter that was enacted in turn in 2016. And this time, when it comes to the OWA Charter of 2016, Miss Toots Ople na yan. Kasama na si Miss Toots sa paghubog ng OWA Charter of 2016. And we are attached for policy and program coordination, as I mentioned. So we will continue to function and gladly and proudly take part in this new department. Two more things that I'd like to point out. We will be part on the ground of migrant workers' offices that will be instituted to replace the polos globally. And of course, we will also be mindful of the Agarang Kalingat Saklolo para sa mga OFW na nangangailangan action fund under Section 14, which is the new fund, which is the fund that stands alongside the DFA Legal Assistance Fund, but this time a legal and other forms of assistance fund to OFWs pertaining to legal services to OFWs, which can be either cases that OFWs file or cases where OFWs are in defense, on the defense. So we look forward to taking part in, of course, taking part in terms of the department administering this fund, and then taking part in the migrant workers' offices all around the world that we instituted. My last point, speaking of the OWA Charter, is the mandate in which we are hanging on to and dearly implementing for the last 2 years at OWA. 2,100 men and women of OWA every day, 24/7, are out there implementing our mandate on national emergency assistance for OFWs. There was the foresight of our legislators then in 2016, headed by Senator Sani Angara, to have this particular mandate in place that we are now carrying out under the COVID era, the pandemic era, under the leadership of our dear President through our dear Secretary Bello. So that, as I mentioned, 913,000 Filipinos have benefited from the Safe Repatriation Program. Safe Repatriation all the way to home LGUs, food transport, and hotel quarantine accommodation that we're currently carrying out. USEC Sara and Admin Bernard are also a part of this, being members of the OWA Board of Trustees. And of course, the OWA programs in partnership with the DOLE and the CHED Scholarship Tabang OFW DOLE ACAP. By virtue of the DOLE ACAP program, we have had 550,000 OFWs who already benefited from the financial assistance. By virtue of the Tabang OFW program, we have effectively tripled the number of college scholars. Pre-COVID era, we had about 10 to 15,000 new college scholars. COVID era, because of the Tabang OFW program and the existing OWA programs, we registered 60,000 college scholars in 2021, effectively tripling even more the number of scholars we have. In terms of livelihood, we have the individual and the group livelihood programs that we are currently managing and implementing, and our total thus far is around 70,000 OFWs who have been served by our livelihood program since the pandemic began. I think I've said too much. I'd just like to say happy birthday, Ka Blas in heaven, and of course, Miss Toots Ople, the Blas F Ople Center, and our dear stakeholders in migration management for the continued support and protection, advocacy towards the welfare of our OFWs. Maraming salamat po.
Salamat, Admin Hansa. And I hope you have time to stay a little longer for questions. And Yusek Sara, Admin Olalia, and Admin Kakdak are really comrades in arms against COVID. And you are heroes. Your staff are all heroes in the eyes of all our stakeholders and the people at large. We go now to Attorney Darlene Pajarito, also a good friend and awardee of the U.S. State Department as a as an anti-trafficking hero, and she used to be the executive director of DOJ IACAT. So, Attorney Darlene, a few words, please.
Thank you, Attitudes, and good afternoon, everyone. Um, I was happy to join with distinguished colleagues in the panel. Good afternoon, Yusek Arriola, Admin Olalia, Admin Hans. Um, I'm very fortunate to have worked with everyone for a brief period when I was with the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, but now I'm in a different program. Um, Please allow me to give a brief background about our program before I talk about the department law. But first of all, it is very heartwarming to listen to the warm stories or endearing stories and moments with Ka Blas. I'm not fortunate to have met him, but I guess the nearest link I could say is that he was the former boss of my dad, who used to work with the Department of Labor and Employment here in Zamboanga. But happy to have worked with everyone, and especially Attitudes, even when I was with AYACAT. Now, our program, the ASEAN Australia Counter Trafficking, or ASEAN Act, is a 10-year investment of the Australian government. So, in this 10-year period, ASEAN Act will engage with all 10 ASEAN member states and will establish direct programming in 7 partner countries. So, that would be Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, through the signing, of course, of a subsidiary arrangement. However, we have yet to sign an agreement with Indonesia, and any activities with Myanmar is currently on hold for obvious reasons. Now, this program hopes to contribute to the overarching goal that ASEAN member states have effective justice system that provide just punishment of traffickers and to protect the human rights of victims or trafficking victims. Now, this program is a manifestation of Australia's strong commitment to strengthen its support across the Southeast Asia region, and of course, to enhance regional cooperation and multilateral relations in countering trafficking in persons. And that would include the vulnerable groups of migrant workers. So, progress towards this aspirational goal will be achieved through 3 end of program outcomes by 2028, which is the end of the program. Now, these 3 pathways includes regional capacity development, that's pathway 1, and pathway 2 is national capacity development, and pathway 3 is the inclusive counter trafficking policy development. Now, my role as Justice Systems Director of ASEAN Act, I generally cover pathway 2, which is the enhancement to effectively implement the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons. And we work with national partners in the target countries to develop their capacity to fulfill the active implementation requirements. Now, this will lead to justice agency partners developing and implementing sustainable, active aligned initiatives, and of course, practical solutions to active implementation challenges. And the ASEAN Act maintains the long-standing focus on improving the justice response to trafficking and to potentially open up new alliances with state agencies and non-state organizations, as well as potential engagement with a wider social groups or organizations that directly work with marginalized and vulnerable groups to human trafficking, including the private sector. Now, central to achieving this third pathway, we developed mechanism to promote joint policy dialogue and learning in five dir- and learning in 5 target countries. As I mentioned, Indonesia and Myanmar. We have no agreement yet, and so we established a grants program of which Blas Ople is a recipient. no, the Blas Ople Center. Now, ASEANAC is happy to have commenced this partnership with Blas Ople Policy Center and Training Institute in 2021. The focus of this partnership is advocacy on migrant workers' protection in new policy framework, prevention of trafficking, and assistance to trafficked persons. And key activities of this partnership are really the policy analysis, dialogues, and coalition building to advocate for the strengthened anti-trafficking measures. And we are very happy that with the signing of the law creating the Department of Migrant Workers, we will continue to work with the Ople Center research on this area to inform policymaking towards the effective implementation of this newly signed law. Now, as we are also aware that the Coalition Against Trafficking of OFWs will also open up opportunities, create awareness, and build understanding on the trafficking persons affecting OFWs, including their rights of the migrant workers and the prosecution investigation of trafficking, labor trafficking, particularly. As we all know, the Philippines is one of the biggest labor exporter in the world, with over 10 million Filipinos working outside the country. Now, our overseas Filipino workers endures the challenges of living overseas, and most are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. So with the enactment of this RA 11641, it is really a positive development. And to borrow the words of Yusek Arriola, a trailblazing legislation. And we expect to see a more consolidated welfare and support services to OFWs. Only one department in handling and managing the concerns of the overseas, which is a good thing. And of course, the question is, will there still be overlapping of services and functions? That is still possible, which is why it is very important to have a clear IRR. And I think Yusek Arriola also mentioned about the importance of really having the soon as possible an IRR, and hopefully the timeline in April will be achievable. And listening to Secretary Roque, former Secretary Roque, also mentioning about the powers of the department in the criminal justice process. That's really something very interesting that I would also like to talk about and answer questions if there are any later. And may I quote this directly from the law? So the department has the power to investigate, initiate, sue, pursue, and help prosecute in cooperation with the Department of Justice and the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, as far as illegal recruitment and human trafficking cases are concerned, no, as defined under their respective special laws. So there are more questions I could think of relative to this particular provision. So what happens, and I think this was also brought up earlier in the first panel, what happens with the powers of the PNP or the NBI when there is an investigation? If the department initiates it, or if there was another case that the police investigate it, is there any exclusive jurisdiction as far as the handling of the case? Whoever comes first, whoever investigates first, would they acquire original jurisdiction of the case? And so can the police still investigate it or not? So this is not stated in the law, which is why the IRR is very important to give clarity to all of this. So as we all know, if it's not included in the law, we shouldn't add, right? And of course, the IRR can help clarify all of this and also to guide the department and the other interagency council against trafficking agency, member agency involved in the criminal justice process. And as far as prosecution is concerned, I think it's very clear that they help prosecute. So in other words, they do not directly prosecute. When it say they help prosecute, in other words, they would still be under the direct supervision of the prosecutor from the Department of Justice. They can appear, but they have to be there with the prosecutor, DOJ prosecutor, and they can help prosecute. So very important also in this, in terms of prosecutorial work. In my experience, when I was a prosecutor, for 15 years in DOJ, we had some challenges in serving subpoena. No, a case is filed by the law enforcers before our office, and that person, one of the respondent there, is a foreigner living abroad. So how do we serve a subpoena to a foreigner living abroad with a foreign address, of course? So before that subpoena is coursed through the DFA, through the Office of the Legal Affairs, OLA, DFA OLA. And the DFA OLA would then serve our subpoena to the address given in that, provided in that subpoena. And it is also the assistance of the DFA OLA to help get the return of that subpoena and return it and mail it back to the DOJ so that DOJ can now resolve the case. This is very important because the case cannot be resolved by the prosecutor if there is no return of the subpoena, regardless of what is stated in the return of the subpoena. The return of the subpoena could be that it was served but unanswered, so we can resolve it. Or if it is returned, but it says there that the respondent could no longer be located at the given address because he has moved without leaving a forwarding address. So we can still resolve that and file a case if the evidence merits it, file the case against that foreigner in court. And the court can now issue a warrant of arrest against the foreigner. But then there's another hurdle to tackle, right? Once now it is in court, how do we serve the warrant of arrest? So again, it's very challenging when it comes to cross-border investigation, cross-border prosecution, and we are hopeful that with this new law, that process can be easier. And so we would also would want to see some guidance in the IRR that would it still be through the OLA or would it now be through this department if we are to serve subpoenas involving respondents who are living abroad. So many of these things should be taken into consideration as far as investigation and prosecution concern. And this, me bringing this up, is just one of those many. But really happy to entertain more questions about in this area. Thank you, and back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Attorney Darlene, and those are very vital points that you raised. And we have now actually in this room the representatives that will be sitting in the transition committee, Yusek Sara and Admin Olalia, of course, with OWA also providing support. My first question goes to Yusek Sara and Admin Olalia and perhaps Admin Kakdak. What are your transition plans, especially with this new with the law taking effect today, Feb 3, as Admin Olalia said? Are there transition plans for your respective agencies? Yusek Sara?
Um, um, Good afternoon ulit, Ma'am Toots, and of course, hi to very good friends kay Admin Malalia, Admin Hans, and of course kay Darlene. The DFA already has a transition committee. It was already constituted by the secretary, and we also already have a technical working group. We've been meeting several times already, and we are preparing for the constitution of the transition committee. But of course, the transition committee can only, well, we're waiting for the appointment of the secretary and of course how it's going to be put together. Of course, we haven't met as a group yet, and I'm sure the other departments are also doing the same. But what's very unique about the DFA is that only the position of OMWA and the positions created by 8042 are going to the new department. But the rest, the ATM teams and the rest of the foreign service officers are staying in DFA, even the funding. So it's just that, so it's going to be, the reason why we're in the transition committee is we have to be able to turn over those the services and even the functions of some of our foreign service staff and officers abroad to the new department. Thank you very much, Ma'am Toots.
Yes. Before we go to Admin Olalia, just to clarify, when you say the positions are going to the new department, not necessarily the people, right? It's just the positions and the functions, and part of that function would be to handle criminal cases involving distress OFWs.
Well,
Am
actually,
I correct?
yeah, actually, what's happening is, of course, in very politically correct terms, it's subsume, but you know very well when you subsume, you abolish. So 1842 created the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs. Actually, dati na ulam niya siya, legal assistant, you know. But the functions of assistance to nationals and legal assistance really goes to BMW. However, as of now, as everyone knows, Polo is only present in 34 posts. We have 94 posts around the world, so you have at least 60 posts that will still stay with DFA. The law provides that in 3 years, hopefully, all posts will have already migrant workers offices. But in the meantime, I'd like to think realistically for 2023 at most that they can transition with the 34 existing posts with Polo and OWA. So actually, it's a transition committee that will really make decisions kung paano yung phase. But the holdover is 2 years. So, and all our people will be on holdover and are willing to assist the new department until they're able to get into they get their groove kasi mahirap talaga because they're only going to have their budget in January of 2023. So as of now, all the agencies, all the migration agencies are performing their usual functions as we help in transitioning to the new department. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Yusek, Sara. Okay, Admin Olalia, may transition plan din ba ang POEA?
Thank you, Ma'am Toots. No? The Labor Secretary has already issued an administrative order creating a DOLE transition team. It's headed by a USEC. The Undersecretary is USEC Arellano. And this DOLE Transition Committee is co-chaired by the POEA Administrator and my brother agency, OWA Administrator Hans. No? The members are all the attached agencies and that will be included in the merger and consolidation of the Department of Migrant Workers. Prior to the issuance of the DOLE Transition Committee order, the POA has also issued on its own a special order for the creation of a POEA Transition Committee. The purpose of which is to have a strategic review of the present operations and organizational structure of the POA, knowing that the core of the Department of Migrant Workers would be the POEA itself. So we are now in the process of consolidating all the inputs coming from the different frontline offices of POA. And we would like to schedule meetings with our counterparts with the DBM, civil service, because of the important functions of the transition committee. First, the transition committee is tasked to come out with the IRR, implementing rules and regulations. No? And we have only a limited number of days for the crafting of this IRR. I think 60 days to be exact, starting today, February 3, 2022.
I think Yusek Sara specified a date, April 4 for the IRR. Wow.
Yeah, 60 days from today, Ma'am Toots.
Really tight, ano?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and after the crafting of this IRR, we need to publish it, of course, to become effective. And then the staffing patterns comes into play. No? Kailangan pong gawin natin yung staffing pattern. And of course, we submit a budget of the Department of Migrant Workers as stated by Yusek Sara a while ago. And this budget must be approved in the 2023 GAA. No? One important aspect that we very much emphasize in the POA Transition Committee is that there must be a consultation process with the stakeholders. And this involves all the stakeholders, particularly the main players in the overseas employment industry. Kasama na po dyan ang private recruitment agencies, ang licensed recruitment agencies, the OFW representatives, the NGOs. No? And fortunately for POA, we have a venue called OLTCC, or the Overseas Land-Based Tripartite Council, which is a good venue for the consultation of this IRR. Likewise, the counterpart for the sea-based sector would be the MITC, the Maritime Industry Tripartite Consultative Council, which will be convened also with the OLTCC after, and then we will try to get all the insights and consolidate again the inputs, which should be form part of the final draft of the IRR before we present it to the interagency committee. Thank you.
Wow, sounds like a lot of work. Yeah, Admin Hans, meron din concerns about distress OFWs during the transition. Saan sila lalapit? Ay, alam nyo, the truth is, may mga nag-iisip na maglalaho na yung mga ahensya na existing, no? But as you said, mayroon namang malinaw na transition plan and a committee that will oversee all this. But Admin Hans, the role of OWA during this transition period?
Yes. But before that, Ms. Toots, may nag-text sa akin, nakalimutan ko rin banggitin si Sec Nieves doon sa aking enumeration kanina.
Yes,
so, si Ma'am Nieves. I might get another text message. So, Ma'am Nieves, confessor, of course, one of the recruits of Ka Blas, and Prosecutor Darlene mentioned something about treaties and agreements. That too was a legacy of Ka Blas. I know that there were bilateral agreements with Iraq and Kuwait during his time, unprecedented at the time. And then yung ILO engagements natin, he was the president of one international labor conference, and ratification of key ILO conventions during his time also. Okay, now dun sa, you're sort of led into the answer na Ms. Toots, which is tuloy-tuloy naman po tayo. The basic principle is that the law abhors a vacuum. So there will never be a vacuum, especially so with the protection and welfare of migrant workers. So tuloy-tuloy lang po yan, and the law has made it clear that the transition period of 2 years will not sacrifice welfare and protection of OFWs. On the contrary, welfare and protection of OFWs will be strengthened henceforth with the law's effectivity and throughout the 2-year transition period. Si Admin Bernard raised the matter on the budget. That's an important part. The National Expenditure Program to be submitted by the DBM comes around June, July. That's around the same time as the turnover to the next administration. In other words, malamang sa malamang, nakakasana yung National Expenditure Program budget for overseas employment programs across all involved agencies by the time the new administration comes in. And as USEC Sara mentioned, by the time the new secretary comes in, etc., USEC, etc. So, crucial yung period now until maybe the next few months, kasi yung budget development process, budget cycle, ay umaandar na ngayon. Now, along these lines, just to tutuldukan ko lang yung point na yon, the National Reintegration Center for OFWs with their new director Dindy Tan, has formulated a stronger reintegration framework programs and a budget proposal that is at least five times higher than their current budget. And their vision is pagpasok ng secretary ng DMW sa July with the new administration, June-July sa new administration, meron siyang bit-bit na malaking reintegration budget. So hindi sana mapaunlakan ng DBM ito at maunawaan ng DBM yung konteksto para pagdating ng bagong administration, hindi sila magkukumahog sa budget for reintegration. So this is just an example. Dito sa budget cycle na sinasagawa ngayon, all the agencies, not just implementing the programs, will make sure that we're laying a pretty huge egg, so to speak, for the incoming administration who, as USEC Sara correctly pointed out, will fully administer the new law in the Department of Migrant Workers.
Thank you, Admin Kakdak. And I'd like to also ask si Attorney Darlene, ano, are there best practices that you saw that should be carried over, lalo na when it comes to the fight against human trafficking and illegal recruitment, that this new department should make sure that it is carried over by the new leadership?
Thank you very much, Adituz, for the question. Yes, I think there are a few good practices. One is that with IACAT, we have already moved into the space where our measures and approaches in tackling or countering trafficking persons is really victim centered or gender responsive. So since this is a new department with opportunity to come up with tools, measures, and policies, it would be good to look at that in crafting that using the victim-centric lens or gender-responsive lens, and also that it be, all of these principles are applied when we are tackling trafficking in persons cases, and using that lens of best interest of the victims, and looking at how the functions of the POA is absorbed by this department, and considering that POA is a member of the council, and then now that the department is also by law amends the trafficking law by saying that it will also sit as a member of a regular member of IACAT. So by law it will also absorb the provisions in the anti-trafficking law where it mentions about the mandate of the POA as a member of the council. So there are provisions in the anti-trafficking law that specifically mentions the functions of POA, which we understand will be also absorbed by the department. And so looking at that, including the creation of the blacklist, I remember POA then sponsored a resolution, and it was approved by the council, the creation of a blacklist. So I have never seen the blacklist during my time, because that was towards the end of my term then. And so but this is an opportunity to carry that over, since it's also in the new law about the creation of the blacklist. But if there is already a blacklist, as far as I know, there was already a resolution approved by IACAT, to look at this blacklist and update it if necessary, or if they think it's no longer up to date, then create a new one. But I like the wordings under the new law about the creation of the blacklist, as it is also very clear to include a blacklist of foreign employers, as we have, I think, a good practice. I think it was still the time of admin Hans, where we had the opportunity to support victims file cases, and to have the foreign employers blacklisted, because it would appear that they had been short, and wanting in their area and protecting the victims, and appears to be part of the scheme of the Philippine recruiter. Now we would want to see this happening as well, and even strengthened by the new department. And also maybe an opportunity, because we still have the challenges on investigation and cross-border investigation prosecution. So the opportunity may be to strengthen that area in gathering evidence and supporting, especially that now that the department has this investigative powers. And one of the reasons why we had difficulty in prosecuting traffickers, if it involves an OFW, is because we don't have enough evidence. And this department can be in that position to be able to get the patterns, because how do we know a victim will be trafficked if, for example, the victim never came back and we never knew what had happened, and then this recruiter is now sending the same recruits to the same employer, and
Thank
new
you.
recruits to the same employer. So to get patterns of that to support a trafficking case. So thank you, Atatut.
Thank you, Attorney Darlene. From Legally Bratty, who's viewing us on Facebook. Thanks, Admin Hans, for the very informative speech. You are indeed a good role model of being a true public servant in passionately heading OWA. So fans club si Admin Hans. Kay Yusek Sara naman and I guess to all of you, ano, what if the new secretary calls you up or sends you a private message no on whatever platform and asks you what should I do first, what should be my priority, and seeks your advice, what would you answer, Yusek Sara?
Well, actually, Ma'am Toots, it's already in the law. It's less than 5 months before this administration ends. So there's a very strict timeline that has to be met, and it's really a duty. And I think kinakabahan nga. I'm sure pati si Admin Olalia kasi nandun yung mga positions namin eh. And we're named actually to be part of the transition committee. So it's really important to us to be able also to to deliver, because it's also part of our legacy. We're political appointees of this administration. So our terms are about to end, so it's very important for us also to meet that. And I think it's the new secretary who will be the one to bring us together to start working on it. And siguro secondly, it's very important, aside from what's legislated, what's workable is to also to be able to give an information dissemination, because the OFWs don't really understand, what's going on. Kaya nga maraming agam-agam. So there has to be, it has to be explained what to expect. And kasi baka isipin nila paano ngayon or what happens. Because there are so many there's very high expectations. At the same time, the uncertainty is also very high. And then last, siguro, what can be done is in the International Migration Review Forum, I was about to, really call Admin Hans and Admin Olalia, because we have to go to New York and to report in May. And also, unfortunately, in some of the forums, pinapalabas na walang ginawa yung Philippine government, especially during this pandemic. And sabi ko nga, imposible to. Parang syempre, we're very emotional about it. And that's why we have to consolidate also our data and really show how many people we've helped, how much the Philippine government spent, and how much was given. Parang it's quite unfair, but last night, of course, in the forum, nagulat kami, kaya inumaga na kami. And there are some narratives na ganun. So it's important for the new secretary also to work with the migration team to be able to showcase the efforts of this administration, especially during the pandemic. Because I would like to say that it's really extraordinary. And it's really, it's something that we're very proud of. I'm sure it's lalo na si Admin Hans sa mga pinagdaanan natin for the last 2 years. And we'd like to show the world how it's done. And nauna tayo and the rest of the world just followed. Especially the quarantine hotels. And yun nga yun. Siguro that's what's workable in the 5 months. Thank you, Ma'am Toots.
Yes, kaya nga importante ma-document talaga lahat na nagawa under this administration, ano? Kaya nga tatay ang tawag ng OFWs kay Presidente. Admin Olalia, your take naman, what should be prioritized? And also, if you can also touch on the question of Nora Braganza about the law being silent on money claims.
Yeah, thank you, Ma'am Toots. No? First, there's a lot of expectation from this department, and therefore, we have to revisit the overseas employment policies. No? Do we need to put more regulation on the protection side and the facilitation of the deployment of OFWs, or do we put lesser regulation on these issues? No? The important fact here that must be brought into the table is that these policies should be sound. And the way to obtain a sound overseas policies is to come up with the enhancement of our tripartism or social dialogue. There must be a continuous consultation with all the stakeholders involved. We have to hear out the inputs coming from the recruitment agencies, the OFWs themselves, and our counterparts also in the overseas employment, like for example, the Polo and the other agencies involved in the labor governance. No? The other thing that must be emphasized also is how to enhance the protection of the OFWs in the light of the new department. No? We learned from POEA that the OFWs need to be monitored constantly in order to protect them from the vulnerabilities of the environment, like, for example, just during this pandemic era. And one of the good practices of the POEA is setting up this online workers monitoring scheme, or the OMS. No, we were able to implement this during the pandemic era, and we got a lot of positive results. So we need to carry over this type of mechanisms that will continue the protection of our OFWs. The third important factor that needs to be taken for a consideration is also the efficient delivery of services to all the clients of the overseas employment industry. No? As we migrate from the core department, the QA, to the core department of the Department of Migrant Workers, there will be a lot of expected disruption. So we need to avoid this disruption of services. Otherwise, this will be detrimental to the deployment of our OFWs, less to the recruitment agencies involved also. The problem there is that if the employers waited for a long time for the coming in of the foreign worker, they might forego the opportunity for our OFWs to get employment and give it to other foreign nationals. So make sure that during this transition, there will be no disruption of the services during this important time. Now, for the money claims, these questions come from the president of
Jepka.
JEPCA, no? Kay Ma'am Nora po. The money claims stays with the NLRC. No? Hindi po natin
Okay.
pinakialaman yon. All issues that relates to the issue on the employee relationship involving monetary claims is with the NLRC. But the good thing about the department now is that there will be regional operations in the adjudication of administrative cases. No? We will bring to the regional and provincial offices the main issue of declogging the dockets of the central office with respect to the numerous and thousands of administrative cases pending before my office. No? Magkakaroon po ng mga regional adjudicators where the OFWs will be able to file in the respective jurisdictions and territorial jurisdictions the complaints against these agencies. No need for them to go to Manila and file the cases here. No? Doon po sa kanilang regions, sa kanilang probinsya, and doon na po yung venue for the disposition and speedy resolution of their cases.
So, Admin Olalia, no need to include in the IRR anything about settlement of money claims, the mechanisms for that, because it's not mentioned in the law.
Yes, ma'am. Nasa NLRC pa po yun. It's retained by the NLRC.
Okay, there's also a question from Kabeni Ligaspi for OWA. I think this is more about the national reintegration programs. Kasi under RA 10022 daw, and I think this is a OWA charter din, may share ang NRCO sa OWA membership fee ng workers. Patuloy daw ba ito? Will this change? Or would you suggest na lakihan pa ito through the GAA? Your thoughts about that? Yung impact ng new department sa reintegration po.
Okay. as far as I could recall, the 10% pertains to the OWA budget. It's in the OWA charter pertaining to um, reintegration programs of the OWA. There's nothing in the DMW naman that will prevent the OWA from continually implementing its reintegration programs, such as the livelihood programs, yung Balik Pilipinas, Balik Hanap Buhay for active OWA members, and then yung currently yung group livelihood program na Tulong Puso kung saan mga 300 OFW groups na ang nakikinabang. Ito yung 100,000 to 1 million peso grant to OFW groups, no? Instituted by the OWA board with under the leadership of Sec Bello and Admin Bernard and Sec Sara also there. So patuloy pa yon. So the challenge is, and this sorts of leans into your question, Ms. Toots, is parang sa pag-conduct ng orchestra, the secretary will have to harmonize all the functions. We'll have to bring everybody together and harmonize all those functions. Now, sa area ng reintegration, since that's Ka Benny's question, yung USEC for reintegration and all other units such as the NRCO who will be absorbed will have to work hand in hand with relevant agencies. Number one, such as the OWA, the attached agency within the DMW. But also, we all know this, reintegration is not just a job of the DMW. It's a job of DTI, uh, uh, DA, Agriculture, and even the Department of Labor and Employment, and some other government agencies. So, kailangan talaga merong internal consolidation of all forces and resources, personnel and budget, and then coordination with other relevant government agencies. Maybe it's a good time also to have a presidential task force that brings together all the relevant reintegration agencies. So, in relation to employment, which is Ka Benny's question, yung isa niyang tanong, kasi nga sabi niya marami daw hindi interesado sa negosyo, may existing effort ngayon spearheaded by the DOLE, SecBello, yung NERS, National Employment Recovery Strategy Program. A program such as NERS will have to be, I agree, employment is as much a mandate of the reintegration agency as livelihood. So kailangan i-dovetail yon yung nurse dito sa gagawin ng DMW. Dapat naka-ankla doon sa National Employment Recovery Strategy under the COVID era ng national government, yung DMW.
Thank you, Admin Hans. In the interest of time, let me just read this wish ko lang message from Brittany L. Spice on FB, and she's an OFW. Sana daw na yung bagong department will make sure na pag sinasaktan ng isang OFW or kailangan ng tulong, merong agaran na kikilos para tulungan siya at madaling kontakin ang bagong department, lalo na on-site. All right. Thank you, Yusek Sara, Admin Olalia, Administrator Hans Kakdak, Attorney Darlene Pajarito. This is really a very informative and timely panel discussion. And thank you for the kind words, for the affection for my father, Ka Blas. And back to you, Anne, and maraming salamat muli. I think you have to unmute yourself, Anne.
To formally close the forum, here is Mr. Benjamin Ramos, President of Nine Media Corporation.
I am honored to be given this task of closing a forum that I believe could last for several days. The Philippine story of labor migration spans centuries. This forum, so aptly named after the late Labor and Foreign Affairs Secretary Blas F. Ople, rightly focuses on the continuing nature of that story. It is indeed past, present, and future. And with the newly created Department of Migrant Workers, which we know will impact stakeholders, especially our OFWs, we know that we must keep tracking this unfolding saga. We in the ALC Media Group are happy to have played a role in honoring the architect of the Philippine labor export policy that helped our country through thick and thin the past 4 decades. Our late founder, Ambassador Antonio L. Cabangon Chua, was a good friend for many years of Ka Blas, and we in the ALC group of companies thank his daughter, Ma'am Toots Ople, and her Blas F. Ople Center for partnering with us. We also thank most sincerely friends who supported this modest tribute to a man who looms large in our recent history, the sponsors who help us make this forum possible at a crucial juncture in our national life. We look forward to more partnerships with the Blas F. Ople Center as our country embarks a new challenging chapter in our labor migration at a time much of the world is in turmoil and some Filipinos are caught up with it. Again, thank you so much to everyone who worked on this forum and our readers and listeners who followed this event. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga po muli sa inyong lahat.
Okay. O Ed, pwede daw ba magpa-picture for posterity daw? Nandito pa mo lahat na pwede. Yan. Yung mga nandito na iwan ko. Sumama ka na rin kaya.
Yeah, for posterity on the day of the effectivity of the law.
Sabihan mo lang po, okay na. Okay. Standby lang po. Okay. Okay na, Dr. Ed. Okay, thank you so much po.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you, Admin Olalia, Admin Hans. Attorney Darlene.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care. Before we say goodbye, here are the, well, we will be giving away the 2 winners na po kami for the raffle. So the answers to the questions were, how old would Blas Ople be if he were still alive today? It's 95. Number 2 is, what beat does Butch Fernandez of BusinessMirror cover? And that's the Senate. So our winners are, and both of them will win 1 kitchen rack and 1 Tough Mama 3-way dispense electric air pot. They are Miss Edna Rivera Mendoza and Mr. Venencio Vano Legaspi. Congratulations to the both of you, and please wait for Carlo. I think it will be Carlo Avalos will be contacting you about this. Okay. Thank you to our co-presenters, San Miguel Corporation, the Department of Labor and Employment, Pag-ibig Fund, to our sponsors, Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, Associated Marine Officers and Seamen's Union of the Philippines, AAP Management Service and Insurance Intermediaries. Thank you to the Ople Policy Center and Training Institute team led by Ms. Susan B. Ople. Thank you to Boss Anton, Ma'am Chai. Thank you to Ed Davad for always being there to support our coffee club discussions. To April and Carlo, thank you. Thank you to the BM Advertising team, Alduin Heights, Max, Bimsa, Boyet, Maynard, Rodel, John, Anna, Millet, Leonie, Annie, Edwin, Leo, and Annabelle. Until the next coffee club session, this has been your host, Andrew De La Cruz. Good day to all of you.
Sa ngalan ng pag-ibig, handa akong gawin ang lahat. Handa akong ibigay ang lahat. Mapadama lang ang tunay na pag-ibig sa'yo. Kaya sa ngalan ng pag-ibig, tutuparin ko ang ating pangarap. Sa susunod na kabanata, isa lang ang ating aasahan. Ang Pag-ibig Housing Loan. Ano man ang ating pangangailangan, may home loan na bagay sa atin. Simple man o grande ang dream home natin, posible dahil sa kanilang lowest rates. Pangmatagalan ang ating samahan dahil hanggang 30 years ang payment terms. Pasok sa kaya nating bayaran. Para sa'yo, para sa akin, para sa pangarap natin. Lahat gagawin, lahat tatahakin. Sa ngalan ng pag-ibig, walang imposibleng pangarap.